Los retos de esta clase son aprender las palabras para los diferentes miembros de la familia, aprender cómo decir quién hay en tu familia y poder formar frases más largas usando conectivos. Now let's start off with some key vocabulary that you're going to need later on. So before we even learn the words for mum, dad, sister, brother and all of the different members of the family, the first word I want us to have in mind is tengo, and that means I have. For example, if we want to say I have a brother, I have two sisters, we're going to need that word, tengo. I have. Now we could also say, en mi familia hay, in my family there is. Careful with the pronunciation here because I, H-A-Y, it's pronounced a bit like the English word for I, so the H is always silent. So we've got tengo, I have, en mi familia hay, in my family there is. And that H is always silent. The H is always silent in Spanish, just like hola. Now hopefully we're familiar with the idea that in Spanish, nouns have genders. They're either masculine or they're feminine. Obviously it has nothing to do with gender in the real world. We can talk about this as grammatical gender, but words are either masculine or they're feminine. And generally, and it's not always the case, but a lot of the time, the O ending, if there's an O on the end of a noun, that often means that it's masculine, and if there's an A on the end of a noun, quite often that means it's feminine. Now there are loads of nouns in Spanish that end in something other than O or A, but there are also hundreds, if not thousands, that do follow this pattern. If we want to talk about a family member who's male, we might want to talk about my brother. Instead of saying the brother or a brother, we might want to use what's called a possessive adjective. Words like my, your, his, her, ours, and words like that. Now thankfully, the word for my in Spanish, it's always the same for singular nouns. It doesn't change for masculine and feminine, so it's just me. If you use the word for the, which is called the definite article, it does change. So the brother, we'd need to use the word el. If we want to say the sister, because it would be feminine, it would be la. And then finally, the other thing we need to know how to say today is the word for a or an, which is un for the masculine and una for the feminine. So we're going to look at that in context in just a little while. And except for the words for parents, most key family member nouns follow this pattern of O ending or A ending. So let's jump in with our first family member. Padre means father. Padre. So if we were to say a father, it would be un padre. The father would be el padre. My father would be mi padre. So padre can mean father or dad, and we've also got this word papá, which can mean dad as well. Different places, different regions, different countries use one more than the other. In Spain, padre is super common. Lots of people would, though, call their dad papá to his face and maybe talk about him to someone else as mi padre. Be careful with papá. Make sure you kind of accentuate the last syllable, papá. Because if you say papa, it means potato. Okay, so soy tu papá means I'm your potato. Soy tu papá means I'm your dad. So be careful with that one, because we don't want to be potatoes. Mother and father, mum, dad, they don't follow that O changes to A pattern that the rest do. But they do have a pattern. Let's see if you can spot what the pattern is. So mother is madre. Madre. So hopefully you've noticed padre, father, madre, mother. We're just changing the P for an M. And similarly to papá, we've also got mamá. There's another pattern for talking about stepmother and stepfather. So madre is mother, madrastra is stepmother. So the rule for step, for saying sort of step in Spanish, is you take off the last letter and then you add astra for women and girls and astro for men and boys. And that means that stepfather, instead of padre, take off the E and we add astro, so we get padrastro. Okay, there's a lot of tongue rolling in that one because we've got the DR and then the TR sounds. Padrastro. Padrastro. From here on out, all of the words are going to follow the O or A ending. So if we've got the male version with an O, we just change it for an A to get the female version. So sister is hermana, remembering that the H is always silent in Spanish. Hermana. And that means that brother is hermano. So we just change that A for an O. It's nice and easy. It's easier than English. If you think about, for someone learning English as a second language, sister and brother, there's no connection between those two words. They're nothing alike. Now think back to just now when we talked about the pattern for saying like stepmother and stepfather. Madre became madrastra, padre became padrastro, so hermana, sister, to say stepsister, that's going to become hermanastra, and brother, hermano, to say stepbrother, that's going to become hermanastro. Okay, so really nice patterns in Spanish that we can follow. Now let's move on to uncles and aunties. Again, the word uncle and the word auntie or aunt In English, there's no connection, but in Spanish, it's like the same word again with an O ending or an A ending. Auntie is tía, and uncle is tío. It's the same with cousin. Now in English, cousin is kind of like a gender-neutral word. We don't really talk about male cousin, female cousin, but in Spanish the ending kind of tells us that. So we've got primo is a male cousin, and a female cousin then is, you guessed it, prima. Moving on to grandparents, grandma, granddad, we've got abuelo, which is granddad, abuelo. We just need to swap that O for an A and we get abuela, grandma. Now if you want to talk about grandparents together, Spanish it's kind of sexist, it defaults to the masculine. So it becomes abuelos. Los abuelos, the grandparents, mis abuelos, my grandparents. If I say mis abuelas, I'm talking about just my grandmothers. So the masculine sometimes in Spanish is used to talk about a group that has kind of men and women in it, as is the case with grandparents. Now some people have tried to make Spanish a bit less sexist by using the @ sign. In Spanish it's called la arroba. The reason being that people kind of think that it's an A inside an O, so it's a good way of representing the masculine O ending as well as the feminine A ending. So that's something you might see cropping up in when you see Spanish, especially on social media and places like that. Now in this picture we've got a couple of twins, and to say twins, if it's two boy twins it would be gemelos, and if it's girl twins it would be gemelas. Okay, so I've used the @ sign here. I'd read that as gemelos y gemelas. Okay, so you tend to read it twice, once with the O ending, once with the A ending when you see that @ sign. If this girl were to say my brothers are twins, she'd say mis hermanos son gemelos. So mi for one becomes mis, it becomes plural. Hermano becomes hermanos, so we add an S to make it plural, and then son means are. And this guy would say mi hermano y yo somos gemelos. My brother and I, we are twins. Now it's also useful to know the word for son and daughter, especially because we use this word to say I'm an only child. We say I'm an only son or I'm an only daughter. So to say son, it's hijo, remembering that the H is always silent. Hijo, hijo. And again, O changes to A, daughter is hija. So to say I'm an only child, if you're a boy, you'd say soy hijo único. Almost like I'm a unique son. Soy hijo único, or if you're a girl, soy hija única. People have come up with various different ways to make Spanish a bit more gender inclusive. So let's have a look at these cartoons by Terry Blass. First we've got hi, I'm Latino, that means from Latin America, with an O ending. And she says, hola, I'm Latina. Okay, so we've got the O ending, the A ending. And for those guys that's perfectly fine because he identifies as male, she identifies as female. But then if we go down we've got I don't identify with either gender, and I'm gender fluid. What are we supposed to use? People have come up with different ways to address this problem. The @ sign, it's kind of less sexist because it doesn't default to the masculine, it kind of shows the masculine and the feminine, but it's still very binary. So people have also come up with the X, you might see like Latin X used, but that's quite hard in spoken Spanish. So the best, and now probably the most popular solution is to use the E ending. So we've got O for masculine, A for feminine, and the E is used for non-binary or to be kind of gender neutral. So for example, amigos would become amigas. So let's imagine the person in this picture identifies neither as male or female, they identify as non-binary. If we wanted to refer to them as a sibling, so in English we've got this lovely word sibling. In Spanish, instead of hermano or hermana, if we use that E ending, we could also say hermane, so we could talk about a non-binary sibling. If they were a step-sibling, we could take the astro, astra ending and change it to astre. Hermanastre, a non-binary step-sibling. If they were a cousin, again in English is a wonderful language for being gender-inclusive because like the word cousin, it doesn't have any gender connotations. In Spanish we could say prime instead of primo, prima. So it's really simple. We know the O ending, we know the A ending, we're just adding a third ending into the mix. So let's put all that together and see what we can come up with. We could say something like tengo un padre y una madre. I have a father and a mother. So y means and that's our most basic connective. We could also say tengo una hermanastra y dos hermanos. So making hermano plural, we just stick an S on the end. To make it plural, if it ends in a vowel, you put an S on the end. If it ends in a consonant, you put ES on the end. And then because we've used number, dos, we don't need the word for un. So this means I have a stepsister and two brothers. Tengo una hermanastra y dos hermanos. Now if we use the other phrase that we learned, en mi familia hay 6 personas. In my family there are 6 people. and then we could do a colon and introduce those people. En mi familia hay 6 personas, mi hermana, mis 2 hermanos, mi madre, mi padre, y yo. In my family there are 6 people, my sister, my 2 brothers, my mum, my dad, and me. Now we can extend our speaking and writing even further by adding extra details such as people's names and ages. So I can add on, once I've said I have a brother or I have an uncle, I can add on to that, que se llama, who is called. So que is a really useful connective. It can mean who if we're talking about a person, and it can also mean that and which. I could give their age. I could say I have an uncle que tiene 40 años, who is 40. And remember, in Spanish, we don't say someone is their age, we say they have so many years. So literally it means who has the number of years. I'll give you a couple of examples of how we could do this. I could say something like, tengo un hermano que se llama Pedro. I have a brother who is called Pedro. I could then add on, y tiene 8 años. So we're using our other connective, and he is 8 years old. Literally, he has 8 years. Now the final thing I'm going to teach you to allow you to give even more detail in your speaking and writing is how to say younger and older. So you can talk about having an older brother or a younger sister. So if we're talking about a younger sibling, we'd use the adjective menor. And if we're talking about an older sibling, we'd use the adjective mayor. Now because menor y mayor are adjectives, they go after the noun in Spanish, whereas in English we put the adjectives before the nouns. So younger sibling, in Spanish literally we'd say sibling younger. The adjective always goes after the noun, except for in just a couple of cases. So if I wanted to say younger brother, it would be hermano menor, younger sister, hermana menor, a younger non-binary sibling, hermana menor. Now to practice everything that we've gone through in this video, I've put together this paragraph of text in Spanish. And I've also included the word también, which means also. So we've got lots of connectives, we've got lots of details, whether they're younger, older, their names, ages, and things like that. I'm going to read through this, and I want you to try and translate, whether it's in your head or on paper, what this means into English. Tengo un hermano menor que se llama Pablo y tiene 8 años. También tengo una hermana mayor que se llama Marta y tiene 29 años. If you need to pause the video to translate that, please do so now, and then when you're ready, push play. Okay, so let's go through. We should have, I have a younger brother who's called Pablo, and he's 8 years old. I also have an older sister who's called Marta, and she's 29 years old. Now after this video, what you can do if you're up for it, is to take a pen and some paper, or do it in your class book if this is part of your homework, and you can write your own paragraph about your family, using this as a bit of a structure, a bit of a template, talking about whether your siblings are older, younger, giving people's names, giving their ages. It doesn't just have to be siblings. I could say, tengo una madre que se llama Cristina y tiene 50 años. Talk about my mother. I could talk about uncles, aunties, whichever family members you like. So you could do a really nice, long, detailed, extended piece of writing on this. And then what you could do is you could also practice reading that out loud to practice your pronunciation. Just a quick reminder to hit that like button if you found this video useful, if you found it interesting. It's just a click of a button or a tap of the screen for you, but it really means a lot to me, and it helps me to know which videos people have found most useful. If you haven't already done so, please do hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the future videos that I'll be posting. If you really don't want to miss out on any of them, you can also turn on notifications.